Does everyone have one? Is Claire bothered by allergies again? I don't see them. Because remember, he was here and then he was gone, and I was up talking to Don and Amanda on the and allergies. So. Okay. Right. Because normally he's here. Keep Claire in prayer, because if I call it the bells ringing in one's nostrils, because I have allergies too. I call it the bells ringing in the nostrils can affect that. So we want to remember Claire. Here, lesson 8, covenant law. The memory text is, know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. All right. Now, let's deal with election. This is interesting. We're studying Genesis. Well, we studied Genesis here, for about a year? It was a long book, and we're doing that down at Wilmington, and we're getting into those parts of election. And I think we maybe even touched on this last week. We're looking at Sunday's lesson, that the election of Israel. What does it mean to say God chose or God elected Israel? What does that mean? Election. We'll say, well, these people were elected, these weren't. Yes.
He called and they responded.
I like that. Hi, Barry. He called and they responded. And that is the key. He called. We respond. So could we all say all of us at one time have been called? Yeah. Sometimes, many a times, right? Over many years. I'll talk with people, and I'll just say I know God was working on me for probably 6 or 7 years before I responded. And so that doesn't mean that from the beginning of time, Maxine was elected and Maddie was not. That's not what we're talking about here. Correct?
Right.
There has to be a response. And the election of Israel goes back to whom? What individual? Abraham. What did Abraham have to do? Obey. And he had to obey in what way? God said to Abraham what? Go. If he didn't go, right? We're talking about someone else. He chose this man. But he had to go, right? The entire election of Israel ends if he just says, I'm 75. I'm here with my family. I just lost my brother, Aaron. We don't know how many years he died. I got Lot, my nephew, to take care of. I'm an old man. Might have 25 more years to live, maybe 35. They might live to be about 110. So they did live a little bit longer. But it's not like, he's saying to Eric, saying, okay, Eric, we want you to move to Bozeman, Montana. Eric could probably say, tell me something about Bozeman. You could go on and look at it. It's a beautiful place, by the way. What's the cost of housing? But he would have some idea. And then he could make a calculated thing. Abram did not have that, did he? It's basically someone saying, go to the dark side of the moon. And if you do that, I'll give you that part of the moon. And by the way, you'll also be the father of many nations, or many Martians, or whatever. I mean, I always say we know the end of the story, but if you're going through it, it's much different, isn't it? When you talk with people, And a lot of the greatest generation is dying off. But you talk to people who were alive in 1942 and 1943. There was no sure thing the Allies were going to win World War II. Believe me, there was not. And now by 1944, yes, but how much longer? My dad, he fought in the Pacific, and he tells me, he said, he was there at Okinawa, and he's in the Philippines, and he just said, we knew in the fall we were going to be the cannon fodder to go into Japan. And, and they knew, that the Japanese people, they were going to fight. They were going to fight and die for their emperor. And no one had ever defeated Japan in a war. Ever. Ever. And if you have that in the back of your mind, that's a powerful motivator. And the other thing they were doing, people who'd served in Europe, they were going to be transferred. So, no one knew about the A-bomb, and it ended just like that. Because the idea was the war with Japan would probably go into 1947. We could have another 500,000 Americans dead. And up to 10 million Japanese dead. So, when Abram was chosen, just because he was chosen doesn't mean he was elected. He was elected when he went and when he followed God. And as God looked at Israel, looking through Abram, they were the least of the least, right? They were the least of the least. They were few in number, a group of enslaved tribes because they were coming out of Egypt now, and politically and militarily weak. Israel's election lay in the ministry of God's love and grace, and that's the same for us. None of us are deserving of it. None of us have standing. So let's look at some texts here. Don, could you read Exodus chapter 19? I want to get the full thing, verses 4 through 6. Mary, Isaiah 56:7. Ken, Hebrews 2:9.
Okay, Exodus 19:4-6. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me among all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel.
All right. So the promised blessing is they shall become for him what? A kingdom of what?
Priests.
Priests. What do they have to do to be a kingdom of priests? He says it right there in the
Obey.
If you obey. If you obey, keep the covenant between me and you, the Sinaitic covenant, which builds upon the Abrahamic covenant about the promised blessing of children and land. If you do that, because I chose you, and if you do that, you will be to me as a kingdom of priests. A kingdom of priests. All right. Now, then we figure out what idea God had for the nation of Israel. Go right ahead, Mary, Isaiah 56:7.
Okay. It says, even them I will bring to my holy mountains and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations.
All right. Who's they? They keep talking about they. When they come. Who's they?
God's people.
God's
people.
So who's God's people?
Israelites. Those who follow and obey Him.
Okay. Who's they? They're supposed to come, right? Who are they? The way I read that, those are the Gentiles. They. Because it's Israel's job to shine that light so that they will come, and my house shall be a house of prayer for all peoples. Yes, Barry.
So you're touching on it. So the verse before that, which is one of my favorite verses, and I love to bring
Read
this
it.
up.
Read it, Barry. It'd be 56:6.
Also the sons of the foreigner,
Ah.
who join themselves to the Lord to serve him, and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants. Everyone who keeps from defiling the Sabbath, and hold fast my covenant,
And that-
even them.
And that means the foreigner. The whole idea is that Israel's not supposed to hold on to this title. That this is our gift. This is for us. It's not ethnic. It has to be more than that. Hebrews 2:9. Now we bring it to the cross and beyond. Ken, could you read that, please?
But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, should taste death for every man.
Okay. What is that? We're building on this. So, who did Jesus die for? Okay. Everyone. Everyone. Not just the good people, right? You know, or those of us with olive skin and dark eyes. Or blonde-haired or blue-eyed. He died for everyone. Is everyone here, do you consider yourself a product of spiritual Israel? Yes.
What did you say?
A spiritual Israel. Are you a spiritual Israelite, Carol? Are you?
I hope so.
There you are. even up in New England. Yes. Whether one is physically Jewish or Gentile makes no difference. See, the plan has been widened from Abraham and his family to when she had the children, through Isaac, through Jacob, to Joseph, to the nation in captivity in Egypt, and then the nation going out, and then coming to the mountain. You notice it's widening. Even there in the Old Testament, I think we read this last week. No, we didn't. I get mixed up with Wilmington and others, but even on the sign of the covenant, circumcision, it said, if there's a foreigner in your camp, or a servant, they need to be circumcised too, because they're a part of the community. So then you keep widening it, and then at the cross, it doesn't matter on certain things, until he died for everyone. So it's an ever-widening.
But isn't that why it's called the everlasting covenant? It was in place after Adam fell.
Yes, it was. 3:15, right? Genesis 3:15. Because Jesus died for everyone. So what is God... let's kind of pull this back. So what is in the back of God's mind when he focuses on Abraham, and this group of people? What is his intention here?
Is there going to be a spotlight to the rest?
Yes, because they were so weak. Remember, under David and Solomon, they were powerful, but pride comes with that, right? Pride comes with that. And that led to their downfall, intermarriage, wanting to be like the other nations, let us have a king like the others. And over time, it just went further and further and further away, till they went into exile. Then when they came out of exile, as you know, as humans, we always like to fight the last war, don't we? We always do. Whenever something happens or a plane goes down or whatever, we fight the last war. We go back. And so when they came back from exile, they said, okay, we know why this didn't happen. We didn't follow the rules and regulations enough. We're going to get rid of the pagan, we're going to get out of that. And they became so legalistic about it. They forgot the heart of the message. And that's what Jesus had to battle. We can't blame them. If we'd come out, we'd say, well, they didn't do the Sabbath, so they overreacted. And that's where you had like 613 rules on what you could or could not do on Sabbath. And you had a whole book on what you could do and what you could not do. Because in their mind, they said, well, we went into exile because of that. Let's have a group of rules taking from the moral law, and let's just use them to cover every instance that you could come into. And so in the end, they were trying to do good. I can see it. And it just overcame.
Wasn't their focus more on the first 4 commandments, and the last 6 were their relationship with God was their main focus, and they wanted to please Him, and so they did all this. But then the last 6, they didn't take care of their people that well.
Well, let me come right back at you, Maddie. You're kind of treading on what I'm going to be talking about.
Oh.
Always happens. Always, because people will say, "Oh, now we know why he didn't answer that fully."
Sorry.
What I would come back at, if I am truly, the first 4 is the vertical dimension, and the last 6 is the horizontal. Don't you think if I'm truly following the first 4 the right way, it will be reflected to how I?
Right.
But in their mind, I know what you're saying. Because they're saying, look, we were worshiping other gods.
Right.
We need to, focus on monotheism, the one God. Hear, all Israel, our Lord is one. They had to get back to that.
Right.
But what they did, they took it as such a nationalistic, ethnic way. You come down to what Jesus said, who is my neighbor?
Right.
And now we're stepping all over my sermonette today.
Oh, amazing.
Well, it's something that is crucial in the Bible. Who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? And we live in a world today. It's much different, but it is one. I'm not going to bring up, but it's split. And we need to repair the breach that maybe I don't agree with you on some things. That doesn't mean you're evil, and it doesn't mean I'm holy. We look at things from different viewpoints. And the fabric, and it's been going on for 20 or 30 or 40 years. It's tearing, not only in this country, but all around the world. The social fabric. And so, you can see that today in how we treat, each other. And I worry about it. I can see that. But it also tells me that we're that closer to Jesus coming.
Amen.
That doesn't mean we put our hands up and say, well, we're not going to, but it does. These are certain things that are happening. Yes, Don.
You touched on something where you mentioned.
I touched on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, how many grenades have I set off here?
About how we treat one another
Yes.
differently and such. And how much of this comes into play, do you think, when you look at the spiritual side of it as spiritual Israelites? Because, every time there's a skirmish over there in Israel.
Yes, which is going on right now. We kind of talked about this last week.
All of a sudden, everybody's looking for the temple.
Yes. Yes. The
Because-
Temple Mount.
Yes.
Yes. And they missed the big picture.
Right.
They missed the big picture. That's a tinderbox there. You have 3 religions in the heart of that city who claim that city as their capital. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And it's a power kick. And unfortunately, you have certain Christians in this country that want to use the Jewish people in such a way to bring on this Holocaust, which they believe then will bring on this war, for 3.5 years or whatever. I was raised in that. And, because we'll all be raptured out of heaven, right?
Right.
We won't have to deal. We'll let the Jews and the Arabs fight it out. We don't care under this thing. And they'll rebuild the temple, and they'll even bring back animal sacrifices. What does that do to the cross?
Oh, wow.
It's just-
I mean, what does that do to the cross?
It's like slapping Jesus in the face.
Now, what they're saying, I haven't studied this as much, but it looks to me what some of these people are saying, either one of two things. Because it'd be the Jews to bring back the animal sacrifices in the rebuilt temple. Either because they're Jewish physically, they don't need to worry about being saved through Jesus, or my fear is the second. The Jews are just a means to our end. Fight that war, get it done, we're already out of here, but you need to finish this, so the next part. They basically, because I know many Jewish scholars who are sharp on this saying, you guys are just using us. You want, keep pushing, start that, and you don't, we can see it over there now. So yes. Monday's lesson, ties that bind. The text is, and he declared unto you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform. Even 10 commandments, and he wrote them upon 2 tables of stone. The moral law, now again, what is the moral law? It's the what? The 10 commandments, or as they say in Hebrew, the 10 words. It's called the 10 words. And again, if we were just talking about, the first 4 is the vertical dimension with God, and the other 6 are how we treat each other. And they should be linked. They should be linked. If one is an agnostic, one can easily follow the last 6, right? That's what I did most of my life. I wasn't raised to treat people badly. And, people who are Christians, well, they want to believe that fable, they can. I won't make fun of them. And by the way, my mother is one of them. And I love her, and she raised me the way. She has something. But the first 4, I really didn't recognize. And so the moral law is really, in many ways, the key part of the covenant. How we treat God and how we treat each other. And the law is to be a boundary for us. A hedge for us. And that shows the love of the Creator God. Not just for Israel, but for everyone. Not just for physical Israel, because the 10 tablets, the 10 words were given to physical Israel there at the mountain. But through the Spirit, the changing of our hearts, the law is removed from stone and it is placed where? Within our hearts. Within our hearts. And that can change. You're saved by grace, but the law will keep you within, the moral law will keep you within the boundaries. And if your conscience talks to you, that also can be a boundary. I mean, it's amazing, those 6 commandments, how you treat others, that kind of sums up about everything.
But you're going to treat others well if you have the 10 Commandments equal love. I mean, that is the character of God, would you not say?
Yeah.
It kind of describes the character of God.
Yeah.
So that is love. And you're going to treat other people well because you love God.
Yes. And particularly if that love is shown in your household.
And isn't that the difference between legalism and real love?
Mm-hmm.
Because legalism, you can keep the law,
Mm-hmm.
but if you're not keeping it for the right reasons, like the Jews did.
Yeah, and that's sad.
Mm-hmm.
It takes all the joy out of it, and that leads you to judge other people very harshly. Yes, the 10 Commandments are a reflection of the character of God. We're saved by grace, but by our fruits. That'll be a part of our judgment, right?
Isn't that why Gandhi said, I like your Christ, but I don't like your Christians?
Who said that?
Gandhi.
Ah, yes. Yes. In many ways, Gandhi, who was Hindu, he took the nonviolent part of Jesus' ministry, and if you look at it, nonviolence was the key to Jesus' ministry. Except my sermon last week when he blasted that tree. And then I told you why. It had nothing to do. He did not use violence. He did not use his power. And it took a Hindu. First in South Africa, because he first did nonviolent protest in South Africa. There's a large Indian community. Then he came to India. And by nonviolence, and many of them died. Some died. He broke the back of the British Empire. Churchill hated him. Kind of would call him racist names. That little dark guy, because he broke the British Empire. Because India was the jewel in the crown. And they got independence in 1947. Now the sad part is, both the Hindus and Muslims tore each other apart. That's the irony is, that was the one thing of nonviolence Gandhi could not stop. He was able to hold both Hindus and Muslims together against the British. But when they got the independence and he pleaded, let us live together. And all the hatreds and all of that stirred up. And when they separated from India, from Pakistan, and if you're like Muslim, you had to travel through India, you would be stoned, killed. Same thing, Hindu. We don't know. There could have been upwards of 2 million people killed.
Wow.
That's known as the unknown genocide. Because the Brits, they just got out and left. They were broke after World War II. And they just got up and left and said, you take care of it. It's horrible. I mean, they couldn't do anything about it. They already set the tinderbox and that. But that is the one thing he was not able to do. And of course, he died, shot by a Hindu ultra-nationalist that thought he was too kind to Muslims.
Wow.
He gave his life for that. And then the Southern Christian Leadership Conference under Martin Luther King, and others, it wasn't just Martin Luther King, used this in the segregation of South. And so, but it was from Gandhi. It was a Hindu lawyer raised in the British Empire who took those principles from Christ. And so thank you. That is very crucial. Tuesday's lesson. John, could you read the second paragraph there for Tuesday's lesson?
The Hebrew word Torah, translated as law in our Bibles, means teaching or instruction. The term can be used to refer to all God's instructions, whether moral, civil, social, or religious. It implies all the wise counsels God has graciously given his people, so they may experience an abundant life, both physically and spiritually. No wonder the psalmist could call the man blessed, whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night.
Maddie, could you read the next paragraph, please?
Sure. As we read the law, or Torah, the instructions and teachings recorded in the books of Moses that became a part of Israel's covenant, we are impressed with the wide range of instruction. The law touches upon every part of Israel's lifestyle: agriculture, civil government, social relationships, and worship.
Okay, the 5 books of Moses kind of form the cornerstone of the covenant and of the moral law. And you read Deuteronomy. I mean, they got everything, it goes from what you do if an ox kills someone.
Right.
You stone the owner, and you stone the poor ox. And, yes. I mean, they have a lot. And of course, Leviticus, that's dealing with the ceremonial law. The ceremonial law, for the sanctuary and all that, which we don't have to worry about today. Okay, let's look at Deuteronomy 10:13. And again, I want to widen it. They're giving these verses, they're good verses, but you need to add one or two to them, don't you, Barry? Okay. Barry, could you read Deuteronomy 10 and add verse 12 to 13?
Sure.
Because it's going to bring in what's going on here.
And the title is the essence of the law, right?
Mhm.
And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you, but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command you today for your good?
Okay, now, you notice why it's important you put verse 12 there. We're dealing here with a relationship. What is the first thing? If I'm going to be able to follow these commands, let's do it this way. If I'm going to be able to do it, and it's not just a check. Okay, I didn't murder anyone today. I didn't do this. I came to worship here on Sabbath. You know, all these things. Okay, I checked that box. That means I'm a good person. What, beginning in verse 12, let's do it in a list. What's the first thing that the Lord requires? Okay, what does that mean? Does that mean the boogeyman?
Honor and respect.
Honor and respect. Okay. Honor and respect. I remember one teacher in seminary, he just said, he's not your buddy sitting at the bar. Swapping stories. Or at a ball game. You respect, you honor. Because we need to realize we're the creation. He's the creator. We need to know who we are first off. Okay, that was the first. What's the second? That means to have a personal relationship, right? To walk with him. I can't be like him. I'm a fallen human being. But by his power and his Holy Spirit and whatever, I should be better, shouldn't I? There should be an upward trend in my life. And so, because if not, I'm not being a very good witness. I'm not being a very good. Okay, walk in his ways. Then what? Love him. Serve. And now, Maddie, this is where you join those two together. If I love God, I'll love my neighbor. It will be reflected. It'll be reflected in how I treat others. People I have disagreements with. You might gain an understanding. And my dad always hit this when I was a young boy. He'd always say, Freddie, you need to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. And I was fortunate I had a dad when I was about 8. I've always imperfectly tried to do that. Where are you coming from? Because 99% of people are good people. I believe that. But good people can do bad things at times. And if we can understand their background, that will help us. And so that is very important. Yes, John?
By good, I assume you mean trying to do.
Yes, exactly. In our hearts. In our hearts. Unfortunately, life is not like an MGM movie where the music rises at the end, and the clouds come out in the rainbow. But it's what we can do.
But do you think that percentage has changed? Because the Bible does say people will be even more wicked at the end of time, like they were in the days of Noah.
We all have wickedness in us.
Right.
Yeah.
But he specifically says it's going to be.
But that doesn't mean you don't try.
Right. Yeah.
And let me. That's a good point.
We're all getting very selfish.
We are. We're getting. And so those, and many people that say give up. So those who still try will be even brighter lights in the darkness, won't they?
And I think what your dad said, my dad told me that too. He wasn't a judge, but
Doesn't matter if you're a
He
judge or
was-
not.
he always
He
said-
learned that from his mom.
he always said, try to put yourself in another person's place first, and you don't judge them as severely.
Mm-hmm.
But also, my mother taught me, that you look beyond the deed and you see the need.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of the,
And if you can stop and do that, but I think what John said too is that people don't do that a lot anymore. And I think it's because I don't think we're good I mean, I think the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, and who can know it? But only God knows it. And so if we get close to Him, then He's going to infiltrate our minds and our spirits with goodness,
Yeah.
His goodness. And that's the only thing good in us. Isn't that true?
People's life is much quicker today. Goes much quicker than it used to, even 30 years ago. People don't have the patience.
No.
Everything is so fast now. Many people, the only thing they read is, on the web. Reading a book, I've never, sitting down and reading a book, slogging your way through it, reading the Bible.
Right.
What do you give the time for? So you're to fear Him, you're to walk in His ways, you are to love Him, serve Him, and then what? Then keep His commandments. It doesn't say first you keep His commandments, then you walk in. That's why I'm like Barry, I wanted that preceding verse.
Mm-hmm.
Because that puts it in context. I mean, as I read this reminds me of Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you, O man? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with the Lord your God. And I had a professor from seminary, Dr. Keith, she said, there you have the cornerstone of all Christian ethics, how you're to treat people. God.
One verse.
One verse. And you can see this is kind of hitting that. Yes.
It's interesting, too, that Jesus doesn't say, first, keep my commandments. He says, if you love me.
If you love me.
Keep my commandments.
Yes. Because I can technically keep commandments and not have a whole lot of love in my heart.
Because you don't know the commandment giver. A person has to know.
That's correct.
Check in the box.
Yeah, it's checking a box. Just check that box. Wednesday's lesson. This is, I never saw this in this verse. Sue, could you look up James 1:17, please? And this is dealing with the stability of God's law. I've never caught this verse before, or I should say what it's trying to get across. Go right ahead, Sue.
Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning.
Okay. Could you read it one more time, please?
Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning.
The Father of lights. I never taught that before. Have you? I mean, I've probably read that because it seems to me, I think that's one of the key things. He's the Father of light, enlightenment.
Right.
And how can we say He's the Father of lights?
Good.
Well, you just go back to the beginning. Wasn't He the Father of lights? The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over what? The surface of the deep. The Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said what? Let there, and there was light. So it goes from a physical, bringing light into darkness, to a spiritual, having us be light in the darkness, the Father of lights. Have any of you, I just want to ask, have any of you lived up in Alaska during the winter? Okay.
I think only you.
Only us. Only that we have the remnant here. And we're not talking about Anchorage or Juneau, which is the rainforest. We're talking about Delta Junction, Alaska. In the guts. I mean, my street was the Alaska Highway. Isn't that cool?
That's cool.
That's cool. My two churches, 90 miles apart. Tok, T-O-K, Delta Junction, I'd get on the Alaska Highway and I would drive down.
Bullwinkle was your neighbor.
Huh?
The moose was your neighbor.
That's right. The moose was my neighbor.
Bullwinkle, he said.
Oh, Bullwinkle, yes.
Cookie!
Yeah. Moose and squirrel. Moose and squirrel. Boris Badenoff. That was a great program. It was actually made for adults. You get all the hidden stuff there, but the guy. See, now you got me off. But I have to throw this in. The people who created Rocky and Bull, I can't remember. There were two guys, and evidently in October of 1962, they were going to get to go to the White House, and I think they were going to meet Jackie Kennedy. I don't know. And so they said, we drove in there. And of course they had these dumb moose hats and all that. And these guards came out and they put them on the ground. And this was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah, when everything was shut down, they figured out, they said, I think they eventually they said, whoa, I don't think you wanted to have jocularity, when the world was coming to an end. But in Alaska, and we drove up there right before Thanksgiving. And you get there in Alaska on November 24th, 2003. And there's two things you have to deal with. What are the two things? Cold
No sun?
and darkness. And the darkness is the worst.
Yeah.
It was dark. It was dark. It would be dark 18 hours of the day. Yeah. Now, you would see the northern lights. It took us about a month to see those. But our members said, make sure you bring a sun lamp with you. Because when we first got there, I'm a morning person. I was sleeping until 10 a.m. Because that's when the first light was coming out. So I had to make sure, get myself up at 6 a.m., go under that sunlight for 30 minutes, do my devotional. But it's dark. Now, it's the opposite in the summer. Yeah, daylight 20 hours a day. I mean, it would be like this at midnight. I could take a walk outside. It would be dusk. It would be dusk. But it would be like midnight. It'd be as light as that. And you could go walking around. Let there be light. And let me tell you, when you're coming out of that darkness, let's say around February or March, and you see more light, that makes such a difference.
Wow.
So I'm curious, as a biblical application, was there less crime in the light periods than in the dark?
I can only say where we were, which was out in the wilderness area. There would have been more crime during the darkness. A lot of suicide.
A lot of suicide?
Yes.
Oh, I can.
You add heavy drinking, unemployment. Why did I come up here? And you had young people swallowing the shotgun. And you would see it in the Delta Wind paper. And it would usually begin from late October through March.
I remember the biggest was like in February and March because the light was coming, but it was still super, super cold. And that was the hardest thing because it's basically just beyond your reach to be able to be outside and having fun. And you could still be outside, but you still had to bundle up and things like that. But we had a member who worked a lot with at-risk teens. And he was the one that mentioned, he said, look, you've got everybody, they've made it through the bulk of the winter, they're in the home stretch, and they just can't take it anymore. So February and March were really high months for suicide.
And there was a lot of it. There was, particularly among men.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly among men. Now, those who were adjusted, they'd go out in October, and they'd be out bear hunting and moose hunting for 3 or 4 weeks. It was like a male paradise up there. The women had to go work. The men would go out and hunt for 4 to 6 weeks. They'd bring back the food for the winter. And when you're that cold, you just have a cellar. That's all you need. But yet the darkness.
And you was up there for 3 years?
2 1/4 years. 3 winters. 3 winters.
That's just craziness.
No, it's not. No, you have to. They're. It was the most beautiful place I've ever been.
When you could see it, when it's live.
20 hours a
How long
day.
did it take you to psych yourself up for that?
Oh, I was. The reason we went there, we took a trip up to Alaska, and the irony was when I was coming out of seminary, I had 2 firm offers, one from Minnesota Conference and one from Alaska Conference. The same district I would take 5 years later.
Well, it was reconfigured, but.
It was a little bit, but it was still Delta Junction. Before then, it was Delta Junction North Pole, and then it was Delta Junction Toke. And no, that's not the North Pole. It's interesting. We weren't up there when we moved down to South Dakota, which is still in the north, but nothing like that.
Felt like we were on the beach.
Huh?
Felt like we were on the beach.
It did.
Tropical.
It did. That first summer, it was over 129 out of 30 days.
Oh.
And I was ready to drive back to Alaska and say, I was such an idiot. Bring me back. You know, all is all is gone. But it was rough. I mean, I would not retire there. But if you're living in Anchorage is like Seattle. Or if you're living in Juneau. Now you're kind of cut off. You got to go in, but it's like you're in a big rainforest. You know, if you can handle some rain, and Anchorage is fairly temperate. You get a lot of precipitation, but you go in where we were in the interior. You know, where it might be 5 or 10 degrees in Anchorage, it's minus 40 where we are. And then, but during the summer, it might be in the, does it even hit 70 in Juneau during the summer most of the time? Sometimes. Okay, where we at, it will hit in the 80s. But then it'll come down to minus 40, minus 50. Where on the coast it's temperate. So there's about 4 different Alaskas. There's the Alaska,
Big city.
Juneau, Anchorage, where we were in the interior, and then you go beyond that in the villages, where you are just cut off, and there's no hope. I mean, the key thing that kept Heidi from going completely insane our first month there, well, 2. We adopted a Mastiff that is in terrible need of adoption. Her name was Alicia, and we were able to take care of Alicia. And the other thing was, as Heidi said, we were next to the Alaska Highway. She said, I can get on that and drive back if I need to. Psychologically, that was important.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're in the bush and you can only access it through air.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
So psychologically, she could get in the car and drive back to Ohio or
But the
Michigan.
2 churches were 90 miles apart.
2 churches.
Mhm.
Yeah, 2. Yes.
Oh, my
Couple-hour drive.
It was actually very nice. I'd have Sabbath at one and then one on the other.
You just spend the day there.
Yeah. You just come and you
Well, that's like driving from here to Columbus.
Yeah, but you don't have any traffic
Oh, well, that's true.
except during the summer. You know, where you would. No, when I would have prayer meeting in Toke, it'd be a 90-minute drive, and let's say anytime from September
Well, almost 2 hours.
through April, I might see 2 cars the whole 90
Oh my
miles.
goodness.
And if I saw more than 2, I'd get a little edgy. Because it shows you begin to adapt. You're going, oh, you know, I don't like this. And
I can see that.
yeah, so yeah. 2.25 years, but I got a lifetime worth of stories.
What does your vehicle run on?
When we were up there,
Anything around here freeze up at 50 below.
oh yes, we had a plug-in for the engine.
We
and
had
then
an engine oil and we had an engine block and an oil heater. We had 2 heaters built into one, and we had to keep it plugged in.
Yeah.
So it kept everything going. And then when you would stop your car, or like if you stopped to get groceries or what have you, you just kept your car going. Because, or you had to plug it in, one of the 2.
And basically, let's say for the truck, you'd get 10 years here, you'd get half that up there. Because remember Dave Crawford.
Yeah,
He,
but that was for the non-handy. The handies, they'll keep them running forevermore, but they have to jerry rig it.
So it'd take a toll in the cars. We have a few minutes. Let's go to Thursday's lesson. We'll move from Alaska back to
Middle East.
Middle East.
There you
Genesis 26, verses 4 and 5. Donna, could you read that for us? Genesis 26, verses 4 and 5. This is dealing with the conditionality of the covenant. If you do this, you will receive this.
And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto your seed all which these countries, and in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws.
All right, and this is interesting. This is God speaking to Isaac. This is the Abrahamic blessing, that you will have children, you will have the land, and then Jacob got the Abrahamic blessing too. And so, as it says, I will multiply your descendants. He's saying this to Isaac. Give your descendants these lands. By your descendants, and of course that's going way into the future, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. That was God's original plan for Israel, physical Israel. Because Abraham what? Obeyed. And he first obeyed, going back, as we began our lesson, he first obeyed how?
By leading her.
Yes. By leaving, by going, right? Go, and he left. And then he continued to obey. What was his toughest? What was his toughest command to obey? Anyone, yes. There at the mountain. The toughest one to obey.
And was that the same hill where the Temple Mount sits, do we believe, today in Jerusalem?
No, I believe, yes it is. Yes. In Jewish tradition, yes.
So they believe where the temple used
Yes.
to sit is where he was going to
Yes.
sacrifice.
That is where amongst the Jewish faith that they believe, which is where, and again, among the Jewish people, we look at it as Abraham's great faith. I think I preached this here. The Jews refer to it, they don't call it Abraham's testing. They call it the binding of Isaac. They see it through Isaac. And if you think about it, Isaac could have run away, right? He could have said, you crazy old man, I'm not going to be. And he allowed him to bind him and put him there. And so to the Jews, it's called the binding of Isaac. And I think it's a way, if you bring the Christian and Jewish dimension, you have a fuller picture of what happened here. The last paragraph there before the pink boxes were summing up, I just want to read the last couple sentences. Israel should obey, not in order to earn the promises, but so that the promises could be fulfilled in her. Her obedience was an expression of what it is like to be blessed by the Lord. Obedience does not earn the blessings, in that God is obligated to bring them. Obedience instead creates an environment in which the blessing of faith can be made manifest. And so you see, between obedience and blessing, we're blessed, we're obedient, and then we receive more blessings that we can then share with others. Joyce, could you close with prayer for us, please?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to come together and learn of your word, Lord. Lord, we ask that you bless the worship service. We ask that you bless Pastor Fred's words as he brings us the message. Be with us today, guide us and direct us. These things we ask in your blessed name. Amen.
Amen.